Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. You're probably aware that Jagex is working on Sailing, old school RuneScape's first new skill since its release in 2013. What you may not know is that Jagex has proposed multiple skills over the years, and some of them came pretty close to passing the polls. Let's take a look at those skills from over the years that didn't make the cut, and then let's see what sets Sailing apart, what appeals to players about Sailing, and what would have happened if we voted for the other skills. Back in 2014, Jagex proposed Artisan. This skill was often described as Slayer for skilling. The concept of Artisan was that a Artisan Master will give you a task to go complete a skilling activity, and you'll get Artisan XP along with your normal skilling XP. So an Artisan Master could assign you to go fish lobsters, and when you fish enough lobsters, you have completed your Artisan task. Most of the rewards from Artisan focused on clothing items and tools that would help you during your Artisan tasks. So you can see some of the proposed tool items, such as a fletching knife that could have been wielded, a fishing rod that could have been wielded, various axes that had a better chance of finding gems and bird nest while you were chopping trees. They also proposed two-handed crossbows, which of course we saw come later in the game. And here's the extensive list of all the new clothing items that they would have added with the skill. Some of the clothing items were cosmetic only, but most of them had some type of effect that would have helped you during skilling. You see you have the Artisan backpack, which would have held skilling tools, some pretty basic magic gear. So Artisan would have tied in nicely with a lot of different skills, but it's not hard to see why Artisan did not pass the polls. Many players felt like Artisan was not a skill in itself. I would say that Artisan was also a victim of its time. In 2014, it was still shortly after Old School's release, and much of the player base wanted the game to remain exactly as it was. It was hard to pass anything in the polls, let alone an entire new skill. So the final verdict for Artisan was two failed polls in 2014, the first one failing at 58% and the second one failing at 56%, although some of the content they worked on, such as redwood trees, did eventually make it into the game. Sailing in 2015. Sailing, which of course originally started as a joke, did gain a lot of support in the community at first, but really Sailing was the brainchild of Mod Reach at the time, who was very ambitious and honestly was a good developer and had a lot of good ideas. I just want to point out in this footage, which is from 2015, that the team already had movement with the ships down, they had the sailing icon, the skill guide, they kind of had some stuff mapped out, and it seems like a lot of progress was made just in that short period of time, where they probably just spent a couple months working on this to preview it to the community. And I can't help but wonder if some of these ideas are going to make it into the current skill. I can only assume some of them might. And they also had ideas for like an underwater area, which I haven't heard much about with the current developers. So Sailing did fail the polls in September of 2015. It did have 68% favorability, which is much better than what we saw with Artisan. I'd say this first iteration of Sailing faced many of the same problems that the newest one did. Players just don't understand what the core gameplay loop is, and of course the criticisms then and now are that it feels more like a mini-game rather than a skill. Moving on, we have Warding. Warding was first revealed as a surprise new skill at the 2018 RuneFest. Warding was essentially a skill where you would break down armor and items for magical essence called Viz, and then you would craft new armor and items with that essence. Unlike Artisan and Sailing, this was the first skill that actually had a gameplay loop, and that was appealing. Although the mechanics for the skill were pretty complex, let's listen to how Jagex described it in a 2018 video.
Warding is the manipulation of a magical energy known as Viz. This is then channeled into a material to form a piece of magical equipment like robes, weapons and jewellery. We'd want to keep it consistent with the smithing and crafting skills, so we roughly aim for a similar time frame to achieve skill mastery. For reference, that would be roughly 3 times faster than rune crafting. In the same way smithing can be trained with only a hammer, anvil and metal bars, warding can be just as simple. Grab yourself a channeling lamp, your materials, and head over to your nearest ward to begin training.
Alright, so that's how Warding was going to be trained. Let's look at some of the rewards that Warding was going to bring to the game. One of the main goals of the skill was to bring better magic armor to the game with magic enhancements to the armor. You can see some of those listed here. And on this table you can see the various list of banes and imbues that they were going to bring with the skill. Banes were going to be additions to weapons that would give increased damage to demons specifically. and imbues were going to be specific enchantments for rings and necklaces in the game to make them stronger. I do like the concept of imbuing armor and socketing items, and today we sort of see that with Upgradescape, how you attach items onto other items to make them even stronger. But with that being said, warding did fail the polls with about 66% favorability. Although, just like with Artisan, some of the items still made it into the game later on, such as Bloodbark armor. I think the main reason that warding failed is because it was a pretty complex skill. There was a lot that went into it, from the training to the armor upgrades, and it received a criticism because players thought it might be a little bit too much like RuneScape 3's invention skill. Even though up to this point we had Artisan, Sailing, and Warding all fail polls, they were getting into the 50s and 60s and almost 70% range, so Jagex knew that the community wants a new skill, they just want it to be the right skill. And that's going to lead us into the last segment of the video, where we have Shamanism, Taming, and the new version of Sailing. As you've seen with Artisan, Sailing, and Warding, Jagex would do some development with the skill and then pull it to the community, and it never worked out. So it seems like they learned their lesson this time, and instead of developing a skill and presenting it to the community, they just went ahead and presented a poll to the community to gauge what people want. This is definitely more productive than wasting development time on a skill and then having it shot down 6 months to a year later. So Jagex released this poll in January of 2023, asking players what skill they would like to see most come into the game. With an overwhelming 49%, players voted that they want to see a utility skill, such as thieving, slayer, agility, construction, or firemaking, come into the game. With that information in hand from the polls, Jagex went ahead and came up with Shamanism, Taming, and version 2 of Sailing. Out of these three options, Taming received the least amount of support in the polls. Jagex described Taming as befriending creatures in the world and forming a bond with it. This creature could then help you with various tasks in-game, combat related and skilling related. If this sounds familiar, it probably does because you are familiar with summoning in RuneScape 3. Although Jagex was quick to say this is nothing like summoning, these are going to be long-term companions that the more you use them, the stronger bond you will have with them and the more useful they will be. They are not the use once and discard type of creatures that we are familiar with in summoning. It is a pretty interesting concept that appealed to a lot of players, and after it did fail the polls, there was a brief discussion about possibly adding elements of Taming into Hunter, but it does not sound like they are interested in doing that at this time, and at least for now we will have to settle for what pets we do have in game, but it would be cool in the future to see some of these aspects from this skill make it into the game. Alright, let's move on to Shamanism. Shamanism shared a lot of characteristics with Warding. The main goal of Shamanism was to upgrade your gear and equipment by imbuing it and adding enchantments on it. You could break down various armor and items to get the materials you need, and then you would go to the spirit world to do your enchanting. This is where you would add enchantments and effects onto your gear, making them more powerful. And then finally, we do have Sailing, the second version. I think what sets Sailing apart from the other skills is that it has a lot of potential and it has a lot of exploration ability to it, and there is just a lot of room to expand in the future. You can tie a lot of different skills into Sailing, and just the environments and areas that they can create sound really appealing. Especially when you consider that they will most likely do some sort of water-themed raids upon the release with Sailing. Sailing still gets compared to a minigame these days, and there's an argument to be made there, but honestly I enjoyed Dungeoneering pre-EOC, and Dungeoneering definitely feels like a minigame. With that being said, it seems like Sailing is still at least a year away, which is disappointing. I hope they do pick up the development speed, and hopefully we see some more details about it here soon. Alright, that's all I got for now. Thanks for watching until the end. If you are new to the channel, please subscribe. I appreciate it very much, and I will see you in the future.